Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today, we're going to tackle a serious and important topic: racial discrimination in America. Racism has been a long-standing issue in many parts of the world, including the United States. Unfortunately, there are still places where racial prejudices and discrimination are more prevalent than others. In this video, we'll explore 10 cities in America that have been reported to have high levels of racial tension and discrimination. But remember, our goal here is not to shame or label these cities permanently, but to bring awareness to the issue and encourage dialogue for change. Let's get into it. Before we start, we want to clarify that this list is based on available research, reports, and surveys. It's important to remember that not everyone in these cities holds racist views, and many are working hard to fight against racism. Our purpose is to highlight the issue, not to generalize or spread hate. Number 10, Birmingham, Alabama. Birmingham, Alabama has a deep-rooted history of racial tensions dating back to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Despite significant progress over the decades, recent incidents have highlighted ongoing racial issues in the city. Reports of racial profiling by law enforcement remain prevalent, and there have been multiple allegations of excessive use of force against African American residents. In 2020, an specific incident involving racial tension brought national attention to Birmingham and sparked local protests demanding police reform. The city's African American community has long faced economic and educational disparities, which are seen as contributing factors to these tensions. Community leaders have been calling for more comprehensive training programs for police officers and better representation in local government. Initiatives like community police dialogue sessions and educational outreach programs have been introduced to foster understanding, but many believe these efforts are not enough to address the underlying systemic issues. Number 9. St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, Missouri is known for its historical racial segregation, which still impacts the city today. Neighborhoods remain divided along racial lines, with predominantly African American areas suffering from higher poverty rates and limited access to quality education and health care. In 2014, the shooting of Michael Brown in nearby Ferguson brought St. Louis into the national spotlight, highlighting issues of racial injustice and police violence. This incident led to widespread protests and a renewed focus on racial inequality in the area. Despite the establishment of various commissions and task forces aimed at addressing these issues, many residents feel that little has changed. Racial profiling and police brutality remain concerns, and there are frequent reports of hate crimes and racial slurs being directed at minority communities. Activists and community groups continue to push for systemic reforms, including better police accountability, fair housing policies, and equal access to economic opportunities. Number 8. New York City, New York. New York City, despite its reputation as a melting pot, has faced numerous racial issues over the years. The city's police department has been criticized for practices like stop and frisk, which disproportionately targeted African American and Latino communities. High-profile cases, such as the deaths of Eric Garner and Sean Bell, have underscored concerns about police brutality and racial profiling in the city. These incidents sparked protests across New York, with thousands demanding justice and changes in policing tactics. Racial discrimination is also evident in the city's housing market, where minority communities often face challenges in finding affordable housing. The New York City Commission on Human Rights receives numerous complaints each year regarding racial discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. Although there have been efforts to address these issues, including police reforms and anti-discrimination laws, many activists argue that deeper systemic changes are needed to ensure racial equality across the city. Number 7. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois has a long history of racial tension, often rooted in economic and social disparities. The city is known for its highly segregated neighborhoods, where African American and Latino communities face significant challenges related to poverty, crime, and limited access to quality education and health care. Incidents of police misconduct, such as the shooting of Laquan McDonald in 2014, have fueled distrust between the police force and minority communities. Protests demanding police accountability and transparency have been a common sight in Chicago, especially after high-profile cases of police violence. Despite the implementation of police reforms and the appointment of oversight bodies, many residents feel that these measures have not effectively addressed the root causes of racial inequality. Community organizations continue to advocate for broader reforms, including economic investment in underserved neighborhoods, improved educational opportunities, and better representation for minority communities in local government and law enforcement. Number 6. Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, California has a complex history of racial issues, with notable incidents such as the 1992 Rodney King riots highlighting deep-seated racial tensions in the city. The LAPD has often been at the center of controversies involving allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and corruption. In recent years, incidents involving the use of force against African American and Latino residents have sparked protests and calls for police reform. Racial disparities are also evident in the city's economic landscape, with minority communities often facing higher rates of unemployment and poverty. Discrimination in housing and employment remains a significant issue, despite laws designed to protect against it. Local organizations and activists have been pushing for greater accountability in law enforcement and more equitable distribution of resources. Efforts to address these challenges include community outreach programs, diversity training for police officers, and initiatives to promote economic development in underserved neighborhoods. Number 5. Baltimore, Maryland. Baltimore, Maryland has faced significant racial challenges, particularly related to police violence and economic inequality. The death of Freddie Gray in 2015, while in police custody, led to widespread protests and unrest, drawing national attention to the city's issues with racial injustice. The Baltimore Police Department has been accused of racial profiling, excessive use of force, and corruption, leading to federal oversight and demands for reform. Economic disparities are pronounced in Baltimore, with African American communities experiencing higher rates of poverty, unemployment, and limited access to quality education. Housing discrimination and segregation continue to be critical issues, contributing to the cycle of poverty and social unrest. Local activists and community groups are actively working to address these challenges, advocating for comprehensive police reforms, better funding for public schools, and investment in economic development initiatives. While some progress has been made, many residents believe that much more needs to be done to achieve racial equality in Baltimore. Number 4. Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Texas has seen its share of racial tensions, often tied to issues of police violence and economic inequality. The city has a history of racial segregation, with minority communities frequently facing challenges such as higher poverty rates, inadequate health care, and limited educational opportunities. Incidents involving the use of force by police against African American and Latino residents have sparked protests and raised concerns about racial profiling. The 2016 shooting of 5 police officers during a protest against police brutality highlighted the deep divisions within the city and the urgent need for dialogue and reform. Dallas has implemented some police reforms, including body cameras and community policing initiatives, but many activists argue that these measures are insufficient. Community leaders are calling for more significant changes, such as increased police accountability, investment in social services, and initiatives to address economic disparities. Efforts to bridge the racial divide continue, with a focus on education, dialogue, and community engagement. Number 3. Detroit, Michigan. Detroit, Michigan has a long history of racial issues, often stemming from economic decline, segregation, and tensions between the police and minority communities. The city's African American population has faced challenges such as high unemployment rates, inadequate housing, and limited access to quality education and health care. These issues have contributed to cycles of poverty and social unrest, with incidents of police violence often acting as a catalyst for protests. In recent years, efforts have been made to improve relations between the police and the community, including the introduction of body cameras and community policing programs. However, many residents feel that these measures have not fully addressed the underlying problems of racial inequality. Activists and community organizations continue to push for broader reforms, advocating for better economic opportunities, fair housing policies, and greater accountability in law enforcement. Detroit's ongoing struggle with racial issues highlights the need for comprehensive solutions that address both social and economic factors. Number 2. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania has experienced significant racial tensions, with issues ranging from police brutality to economic disparities. The city has a diverse population, but racial discrimination in housing, education, and employment remains a persistent problem. Incidents of police violence, such as the shooting of Walter Wallace Jr. in 2020, have sparked protests and calls for police reform. These incidents have underscored the community's concerns about racial profiling and excessive use of force by law enforcement. Philadelphia's minority communities often face higher poverty rates, limited access to quality healthcare, and underfunded schools, contributing to a cycle of disadvantage. Activists and community leaders have been advocating for comprehensive police reforms, including better training and oversight, as well as initiatives to address economic inequality. Programs aimed at improving educational opportunities, supporting minority-owned businesses, and promoting affordable housing have been introduced, but many residents feel that more needs to be done to create a truly equitable city. Number 1. Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia is known for its rich African-American cultural history and has often been called the Black Mecca. However, the city still faces significant racial challenges. Despite being a hub for African-American entrepreneurship and culture, racial disparities in wealth, education, and healthcare persist. Incidents of police violence, such as the shooting of Ray's Hard Brooks in 2020, have sparked protests and brought attention to the issues of racial injustice within the city. Atlanta's minority communities often face economic disadvantages, with higher poverty rates and limited access to affordable housing. The city has implemented various initiatives to address these disparities, including economic development programs targeted at underserved neighborhoods and police reforms aimed at increasing accountability. Community organizations continue to advocate for systemic changes, such as fair housing practices, better funded schools, and comprehensive healthcare access. While progress is being made, Atlanta's ongoing struggles with racial inequality highlight the need for continued efforts to ensure justice and equity for all residents.